Hello and welcome. I have with me today B.L. Blankenship, author of the horror genre. Ben, how are we doing today?
I'm doing pretty well right now. I'm battling a cold, but other than that, things are good. I've been hot and cold all day.
That's awesome, man. So just kind of looking through your bio, I see that you are everywhere. You are on freaking Goodreads, Amazon, Barnes& and Noble, Facebook, Twitter, MeWe, and Parler. And I believe that you have a link tree that will be provided in the show notes for our listeners and viewers. Just to kind of give a little bit of background, what I'm looking at is that you were born in Toledo, Ohio, and you eventually moved to Rockwood, Tennessee, where I'm assuming this is where you discovered your Southern soul. And you eventually authored a ton of stories. I tried to count them up, but I think I lost count at like 20 or 25. If you count your poems, your short stories, your novels, it'd be what? Probably somewhere 50. But your work is described as splatterpunk, an extreme horror. Historical fiction doesn't quite do Blankenship's work justice, as he pulls us along to far-flung places lost to memory. Like in his book, and this is personally so far the favorite one I've seen, and I'm definitely going to be buying from you. God Walks the Dark Hills, Books 1 and 2. This is the story of an African-born freeman who eventually ends up joining the Confederacy. Blankenship, Ben in front of us, doesn't hesitate to shed light on the participation of minorities on both sides of the conflict. With that in mind, the work that I've been lucky enough to sample has proven beyond a doubt that his stories are a solid fortress of a kind of dread nihilism, not unlike the unapproachable anxiety that gave me the heebie-jeebies in movies like John Carpenter's The Thing. So I will say once again, Ben, thank you for coming on and welcome to the show.
Thank you. I really appreciate that great introduction. Yeah, I put myself out there as a Western horror author. Western being more about the time period and feel of it than necessarily geographical. They do have a Western Writing Association. It's almost like bluegrass. If you walked in with like a drum or whatever, they would throw you out. I know that because I'm a drummer. But yeah.
Okay. Man of many talents, then. I love it. So, can you first tell me about CreepyCon? It was last week, wasn't it? Was there anyone cool there?
Everybody there was cool. It was so nice. It was my second convention as an author. I did a bunch of book signings and whatnot. I did Scares That Care, and that was like a month before. And then I did CreepyCon. The benefit of CreepyCon to me is its driving distance. It is 30 minutes down the road, Knoxville, Tennessee, like the downtown part, from where I live. I live in Kingston, Tennessee. That's in Roane County. That's right by Rockwood, where I moved to. So, Chattanooga, Knoxville, Crossville, Oak Ridge, all that stuff is just driving distance back and forth. It was great. Everything about it was. There were so many wonderful people there, great booths, fantastic folks there. Sold a lot of books, a lot of God Walks the Dark Hills book 1 and 2, a lot of the anthology, A Book Without a Name, sold there particularly. And it's not Western horror. It's because I'm going to be at a sci-fi thing. I have a series called Abraham Lincoln Burns in Hell. It's way less violent than all the others. It's quirky. It's a first-person narrative, kind of like Bram Stoker Sherlock Holmes. So John Wilkes Booth travels interdimensionally to assassinate different tyrannical variants of Abraham Lincoln. I do kind of tie real history in it, and I'm like, if this and this was different, this is why this would be like an alternate world. These things would change the scope of everything.
So that's pretty cool. Are you familiar with a work called Under Gray Skies? And the name of the author kind of escapes me, but it's kind of an alternative history where the Confederacy won the Civil War or War Between the States or War of Northern Aggression. And what I loved about his work, and it's like, God forgive me, I cannot remember his name. This is terrible. And I follow him on Twitter too, so I feel extra bad. But it sounds like a lot of what you're doing is a ton of primary research that goes into this.
Huge.
So can you explain, like, what's the process, like your writing and research process? What's that methodology like? What does that look like? What do you do to prepare for a story?
I'm really OCD. That helps you to be like hyper productive. Um, I think in a lot of things, whether it's writing for a book or whether it was like a church doing a Bible study, one question leads to another. It's all about asking good questions, and then you're chasing the answers, and it sends you down a rabbit hole. I really thought in God Walks the Dark Hills, which is like the nexus of my Western horror world. Everything's connected around it. It is lore. It's canon. Um, I would think where I wanted the characters to go, and I would start researching those places and looking into that, and that would establish who they would be running with during the army and all that. I try to make choices that make sense. Um, Big things like Robert E. Lee or Ulysses S. Grant or whatnot that happens with them, big historical things, those stay the same and all of my Western horror stuff overall. It's just I mess with fictitious characters in there, and that just seems like it tethers it and makes it feel more real. If it was raining on such and such day, or this person really did that thing, there's so many Easter eggs in there. There's a scene in God Walks the Dark Hills book 1 and 2 during Shiloh that isn't just kind of like what could have happened in the actual war, but it's a scene that I ripped from another person's point of view from the movie How the West Was Won. So I constantly throw
Oh,
things like that
yes.
in there.
Mm.
Yes, Library of Congress. I love them. I find a lot of information through there, but I've read a ton of books on the Civil War, people that are looking at this angle or that angle or whatnot. But I really like to look when you're studying history, things that were written at the time when it was going on, rather than something else that's kind of a little bit revisionist because it's down the road when, they're a distance from it.
So you bring up two really, really cool points that I would kind of like to expand on a little bit. So you are obviously a history buff, but you're a little bit more than a history buff. And I know that because I have that same kind of bug as well. It's like an itch that just never goes away. I know everything that you just described to me, having these questions that are raised about the South, about our past, about folklore. I had like a real strong attraction to like Russian history and Turkish history. So when I was 11, 12, and 13, I had purchased books on the Ottoman Empire, the Russian Empire. I was an atlas junkie. I was poring over really, really minutia. And it was the minutia that kind of draws, I think, folks like you and me into it. This particular battle, this particular unit. But I think that's a good segue to my next question. So your parents are Southern, right? And I guess born in this, geographic southern portion of the United States.
My
Is that
dad was born in Pulaski, Tennessee, and my mom was
okay?
born in Harlan, Kentucky. Yes.
Okay. And so you were born in Toledo, Ohio, and then you moved to Tennessee. So I'm wondering then, do you consider yourself a Southerner?
I think that that's a question that everybody from the state of Maryland has to ask themselves every single day. I've been in these Civil War chat rooms, and is it the North? Is it the South? Knowing about the history and all of it, it's interesting because you have people like William Clark Quantrell, who was amazing. He was the guerrilla soldier. Jesse James was in his group. Bloody Bill Anderson was in his group. Where was he born? Dover, Ohio. You have several people that are there. East Tennessee, technically, a lot of that, like the majority of East Tennessee, was the federal government. It was the Union. There's like, if you look at a map, you can see them where they're color coded. There's like a county here and there. Even though when you look at like local history in Oliver Springs, it was brother versus brother. You'd have people in the same household, and the guy's like, I'm going to fight with the Confederacy. I think all of that's super interesting. My childhood in Toledo wasn't glorious and grand. I had a thick Southern accent when I was a little boy, and then they sent me to speech. Not because of that I stuttered, but they sent me to speech there in school, and it's a different world. It's like a different culture. It's like you're in a different country. I really felt at home when I moved to Rockwood, Tennessee. I loved it so much. Still love Rockwood, but it's a nice place. When I was born in Toledo, just to give some narrative there, it was Flower Hospital, 1981, April 27th. But I lived in the township of Sylvania. My dad worked for General Motors, and so it was more like the suburby area. If you went down a couple streets, it was like some Ritchie streets. They have that GM money there. They've got a phenomenal zoo. They've got a gorgeous art museum. I could live in that art museum and be happy. But it's a pretty big place. There's some rougher neighborhoods, but I was very suburban where I was born. I'd ride bikes and rollerblades and all that.
So you mentioned that you didn't really have a happy childhood growing up. That's not something
It's when
we
I
have to
learned
get
to
into.
draw. I learned to
When
draw.
you learned to
I
draw,
learned,
okay.
yeah, learned to write poems, all that. I mean, I didn't have a ton of friends. I mean that you hear that with Kurt Cobain or whoever, but I mean that's when you start using that creative process. I was the kid that would look like be drawing in math class, and they're like, "That'll never do you any good." And I worked professionally as a graphic artist, so I ought to send them some aloe.
Yeah, it kind of shows them, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Whenever I was taking math, which I despise and I hate to this day, which is really bad because I have a government job now that requires me to do a whole lot of math, especially in law enforcement. And when I was in math, I was constantly drawing maps. I mean, I would draw like a map of an empire here or there and have my capitals on it. So I definitely can feel you where you're coming from. So your work is described as splatterpunk and extreme horror. Now, for those readers and viewers who are unfamiliar with this genre, and by the way, pearl clutchers, you guys don't need to come over here. But what can they expect in your work?
If you were to take like these really graphic horror movies, I Spit on Your Grave, Martyrs, I mean like the French one, what is it, Through the Eyes of My Mother, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, that level of like violent stuff, and if you were to stick it in the 1800s, that's basically what you're getting out of my book. I'm not like ripping on any of those characters. I'm just saying that level of like profane violence, cannibal holocaust, whatever, that's what you get when you start talking splatterpunk, people being dismembered, big long rape scenes. I don't just put stuff in there, by the way, just gratuitously. There's always some kind of reason or after effects. I don't have things happen and then act like they don't happen. That's just not the way the world works. But it's really violent stuff. I like the psychological stuff too. So it's not just like, hey, these underdeveloped characters and they're hacking people to pieces, because that's just lazy writing. I think scary is when you don't know everything about something and you hear that thing behind you and you're too afraid to look, and that's more unnerving. But it has all of that. It has things that are demonic in it. It has cryptozoological things in it. It has wartime battles in that book. In book 3, it felt like it's written a snuff film. You've got some people in a dungeon for a prolonged amount of time. And I was talking to some author friends of mine, and I'm like, what can this guy do to them to really drag this out? And it just makes me think that I have a more violent imagination than them. It's way beyond waterboarding, hacking pieces off of people and all kinds of stuff.
What you just bring up, these scenes that you described. Now, I don't want to give away too much of your work. And what little of your work I've sampled and I've kind of had a chance to view and kind of go over, I would like for our viewers out there to know is that Ray Bradbury said that a great writer can show, and average writers tell. So if you guys out there decide to buy Ben's books, he is a shower, 100%. I mean, he isn't just, like you said, listing off, hacking off one body part or another. You are truly getting, I'm trying to think how best to phrase this, because I'm not a natural writer myself, but you really kind of get into the scene or the skin of these scenes, I guess, is what I'm trying to say.
The trajectory of a bullet, I'm really visual. You get that from the whole artist thing. So, I picture, this person shooting and the bullet goes this way and it impacts here and it comes out here and this person's flopping around like a fish. And so you've got this other stuff going on, but then I defer to the fact that this person's still flopping around like a fish on the ground, because you want people to be able to see, like if there was a black dog walking through a green field with yellow flowers under a blue sky, you want them to see that. So you're trying to paint a picture with your words.
So this is a question I just came up with on the fly. Have you ever been exposed to like carnage, like a car wreck, any kind of violence that you feel comfortable? And I want to keep this as safe from the YouTube, our censorship overlords as possible. But now for me being in law enforcement, I mean, I responded to all kind of different stuff. And the scenes that I've read by you, it just kind of seems like, hey, I'm having a mental image of someone who's kind of been there and seen stuff like this before, because there's certain little minutia details that unless you've had access to like medical journals, crime scene photos or something, I mean, there's something in the air when you're exposed to carnage. Yeah, I don't know if it interacts with our pheromones, it affects us. And I mean, I'm not trying to do justice to someone who suffered but
that is a phenomenal question and a great insight. I used to be really interested in law enforcement. So, I mean, I've seen all these serial killer documentaries. I've seen crime scene photos. I've went through all of that. I have a degree in private investigation. I graduated high school at 16. I got that 2-year degree by the time I was 18. Nothing ever came of it. But yeah, all that sort of things. I'll tell you, and, other than like the bullied as a kid in Toledo, because that's, it's kids. When I don't even know if I was late teens or early 20s, I was driving up to this thing that was kind of like an American Idol thing. I was dressed to the nines. I looked like I was drug off of The Godfather. I've got this this pinstripe coat, and it's like mid-calf. The guy that played Lionel Luthor, John Glover, he would wear coats like that in Smallville. And I was like, I've got to find a suit like that. And so I had that on. I had like my two-tone black and white shoes, all that. I know I look extremely Jewish. I look like I got a bar mitzvah or something. But anyway, so it's like I've never really seen Nashville. My mother was in the car with me. She went with me, and she's like dead tired. And I'm not going to give graphic depth or all that. I'm just going to say it was a miracle that I got away alive. But I got off on this exit. I hear it's not as bad now. It's Trinity Avenue. That's affectionately known as Gangland. So I was driving around. I was just trying to see the city, and I got lost. It looked like the seedy part of Chicago. I've been all over the U.S. I've driven an 18-wheeler. It looked like the rough part of Chicago where I was at in Nashville. You know how cities, they have those places. It was that place. So I thought, I'm going to pull into this gas station, use stupid judgment, and there's hindsight 2020. There was like this one light flickering, like a Freddy Krueger movie or something.
That was the universe. That was the universe, Ben, trying to warn you away.
Yeah. And I nudged her and I said, hey, this is a really creepy looking neighborhood. You might want to get up. And that moment I get out of the car before she can like grab me and stop me. And I wasn't thinking that somebody, by the way, this was 4 a.m. So when you're in a neighborhood like that and people are at 4 a.m., I wasn't thinking, hey, they're going to run at me. And this guy runs at me from like across the road. And he's trying to shake me down without a gun. Hey, I've got this situation going on. Tells me a big story. I need some money. I'm overly observant. I pick up on people and all kinds of things. I did notice that his friend was coming out at me from the side and had disappeared behind me. And that's what was making me really nervous. Now, my mother said that he was standing about like 6 inches, 8 inches behind my back. And she's thinking they're going to kill my baby. And she's in the car and she's praying. And he kept looking at the car, this guy did. And I happened to have a lot of money on me, like cash money at that time. And there's a big story behind that. But I thought if I don't give them anything, they're going to kill me. So I gave them all the $1 bills I had. It was like a wallet that was going to bust. You know what I'm talking? It was like $400. Yeah.
Okay. Wow.
So anyway, I give him like about, I don't know, $20, $30, whatever it was in ones, I mean, and he just keeps looking around at that car, and he's following me back to the car, and he's like, hey man, he said, can't you kind of help me out? Can't you kind of give me some more? His eyes,
I just gave you $400, dude. What do you want?
Yeah, they looked like a lion or something. I thought he's going to kill me. And I'm like praying like in my head and everything. And I'm thinking about the story in the Bible. of who was it? I know his name. It's escaping me. That David said, "You died a fool's death." Abner. You died a
Oh,
fool's
yeah.
death. Your hands weren't bound, your feet weren't tied, but the bad guy put his arm around him and pierced him under the fifth rib, and he was like manipulated and coerced instead of like fighting like down to the death. I'm thinking, man, I'm an idiot. But so I'm going to get in the car, and he's like, "Can't you help me out anymore?" I'm like, "Sorry, man. That's all the ones I've got," and I floored it. Yeah.
It's really amazing. Like, if we think of threats, a lot of, some folks will think of cars, lions, scary stuff. But really, Homo sapiens, we're the most dangerous animal on this freaking planet. And that story is just a perfect illustration of that. I'm glad that you and your mother are physically okay. You're physically safe. I mean, I'm certainly glad for that. And this is not a good segue after what we just talked about, but I'm dying to ask this question.
Go ahead.
So when I was reviewing your work, this passage from "Look Away, Dixieland," blood runs cold. It caught my eye. And if anyone has a copy of your book, I'm looking at page 95. You see, a good historian likes to cite his sources. But journeying into the 1860s, several wars still raged. The United States battled the American Indians on several fronts, fought the United Kingdom in the Pig War. The country was in a state of political and social turmoil. Newly elected President Abraham Lincoln drafted an army to forcibly keep South Carolina from seceding from them. It was an action that escalated into the War of Northern Aggression. Now, my native South Carolinian ears, I've lived in the South my whole life, I picked up on that last phrase fairly quickly, the War of Northern Aggression. And I just had a passing thought. Is this a display of your own personal belief about the Civil or war between the states? Is there anything you'd like to share on this point? And if so, how has your past, growing up in both Ohio and Tennessee, helped craft this worldview? And also, and if I need to repeat this question, I perfectly understand it, but is there any intellectual guides or mentors you've had in your life that helped you reach these conclusions?
There's several things that I could say to that kind of sets the tone for the stories. If something's entirely too popular, I'm going to do the complete opposite. I'm going to say that's too mainstream. There's not a lot of stuff where the main character is a Confederate. Which is odd because tension creates a good story. You had 2 to 4 people against one guy during the American Civil War. You had these women that were left alone, and they had people that were known as bummers that would go into the towns and terrorize them. You had Sherman's March to the Sea. I'll throw out a couple things for people that are really like history-minded. You had the fact that Abraham Lincoln committed acts of torture on people that lived in the North, water torture and whatnot, that would not speak for him. Not that spoke against him, people that weren't like, a Lincoln is God and master, basically. All kinds of things that leaked when he got a citizen of the UK. There was a thing where they tried to pull some Confederates off of a ship that was called, I believe, the Trent Act or something like that. That was a United Kingdom ship. You're not allowed to do that. It has to do with diplomacy. There was all kinds of things. There was a war out or a battle out over by Brazil. And the man that was over that, they went berserk on the U.S. And they're like, you know what? He's going to be disciplined. The war ended. The Union won. They promoted him instead. Before, during, and after the American Civil War, War of the States, whatever, were the Indian Wars. It was the federal government slaughtering Native American people. If you were fighting in the war as a Confederate, and by the way, I had ancestors that fought on both sides. All of my Union people were from Harlan, Kentucky, and then the Confederates were all around. A thing that's not mentioned in the book is that my 10th great-grandpa was the 3rd great-grandpa of somebody that I guess everybody in here has heard of, Robert E. Lee. But, there's a lot that people don't look at. So you're a Confederate and you're in a Union prison. And they're like, you don't have to kill like your brothers and everything, but you can kill the red man. That was called a galvanized Yankee. So they would let you out, and I mean, why wouldn't you? You know, do you know how bad a Union prison is? I mean, it's like you can
So,
just go and kill Indians and
mm,
you'll be part of the federal army, but you don't have to kill like your people, but we're just going to send you out west and, whichever, Cheyenne or whoever.
so these were Confederate regulars who were captured in the war, and they were in, I guess, some Union prison camps, and they were basically, I guess, kind of pressed into service onto the, I guess, the western frontier against, I guess against the federal government's enemies in that area. Is that kind of
Oh,
more or
oh,
less
all
what they
kinds of
were?
things.
Yeah.
There's so many phenomenal books on the war that don't follow what I would call like a mainstream propaganda that you have hammered down your throat in school. There's a man. I can tell you the name of the book. What is it? It's I know the name of this book. Forced into Glory, Abraham Lincoln's White American Dream. And it was written by the man, a black man, that's over BET Network. And he's a black historian. And he talks about how Abraham Lincoln wanted to ship everyone that was of the black race out of the United. He was against slavery, but wanted to ship them out of the United States of America, did not want them integrating with people, send them out to Liberia and all. They did a test. There were nothing there for them, and a lot of people died. Black people died because of Abraham Lincoln. Um, there was a whole lot of that. He kept calling them into the White House over and over and saying this is a great thing. His vice president was saying how it was a benefit that you've had the privilege of coming over here to America and being forced into slavery. Not learning how to read or anything. So that's garbage. It's really monstrous to say that. But these were men. These were flawed people and flawed ideals, and there were people that were very wrong on both sides in different things. I do like that my ancestor, General Robert E. Lee, he and his wife, the granddaughter of George Washington, president, that they were teaching their slaves how to read, and that they freed them before the start of the war, whereas like Ulysses S. Grant kept his slave, during it. So, I mean, there's a lot of stuff that people that really don't dive into history know. It's interesting. The main character in God Walks the Dark Hills, his name's initially Chike Bancole, and the Kingdom of Loango, Congo, Africa. And then he gets sold into slavery, and it becomes Reginald Beauregard Valencia, and there's a story behind that. But he becomes a black Confederate, and that's almost this weird, contentious thing where you have people acting like there wasn't something of that. It's not hard to find them. It's not hard to find them in Georgia. It's certainly not hard to find them in Louisiana. That state was a melting pot, like racially.
So,
Louisiana. Yeah.
so when you say that it's not hard to find them, I haven't heard a whole lot about black people in the in the war between the states, the Civil War, who served in the Confederacy. What kind of sources are available if someone would like to explore that aspect of our history a little bit further? Like, is there any kind of primary sources on that? Is there
Yeah,
units? Were they regulars, or what were
there's
they?
a lot of books on it. I mean, it's not tons and tons, but I mean, there are books on it. You know who I really like? If I was going to say all things like Southern history, I really like Abbeville, the
Oh,
Abbeville
okay.
Institute. Yeah, I
Mhm.
mean, I think that they do a lot of great work. They've got like De Lorenzo, and he's an economist, and he like talks about the financial things that were going on and tariffs and all that. But no, I mean they cover like everything, all these big college professor things. But I mean, I think that they're a great place to like look for stuff like that. But just as you get to fishing and everything, you find more and more stuff. I've read books on Lincoln and how he was a spiritualist. That his lady that had seances down there
Mm.
talked about it, and all kinds of things. I only mention that because he's kind of made into like Jesus. He was the only president in the history of the United States of America that didn't declare himself to be a Christian. And I only say that
Mm.
because he's painted differently And like, in the school, it's like he was this perfect, Christian church going, but he wasn't. So, let's just be honest.
Well, you can just look at how, the amount of ambiguity in history is really, really astounding. And if we look at the Civil War era, especially the post-Civil War, the Reconstruction era in the South, I think one thing that's starting to happen is that a lot of historians and, and amateur historians like us, and especially because of the internet, we're starting to finally get primary sources that the average guy or girl can just kind of pull up and study for ourselves. I mean, if you really want to know what someone was thinking, what they were feeling during the Civil War, instead of reading a book that, Joe Schmo wrote, 200 years later, you can just go and actually read the editorials that soldiers were writing back home in 1863. You can read about, Private Schmidt writing home to his mama about what the war was like and why exactly he was fighting. And you really bring up a good point about Abe Lincoln, and I'm trying not to, go too far down this rabbit hole, but with, with me having a major in history, I love this stuff. Yep. I could probably talk about this all day, but
and he's not a major character in it, but because of his role in it, he's obviously in the background all through it, because you wouldn't have had the American Civil War without Abraham Lincoln, or supposedly. But I mean, he's directly related to the war.
So, are you aware of these succession committees that South Carolina sent out? And this would have been right around the time the firing on Fort Sumter. And they were illustrating the reasons for Southern secession and basically, this political entity that they wanted to call the Confederacy, which I always thought was really interesting. When I was taking my Southern history classes, it slipped out, my Southern. That dog don't hunt. It's starting. I can't stop it. Help me, Ben. But when I was taking a Southern history class at USC, which is University of South Carolina, for those who are unfamiliar, we were studying about, so instead of calling it Dixie, they would refer to the South as the Confederacy, going as far back as like 1820. And, I didn't know if you were aware of that, or if you had run across that in your studies, but there's mayors, there's governors, there were senators, and they referred to the South as a confederacy. And it just kind of lends, more credence to the idea that what the South had was a very distinct culture, if nothing else. But what I would like to do, my friend Ben, is if there's time at the end, we can certainly revisit this topic. And for our listeners and viewers, I'm hoping to have Ben on again in the future one day. So this isn't going to be the last interview, the last and the first. But so what I would like to do to kind of move us along is read to you a short excerpt with your permission. Okay. And so I'm just going to kind of start. And I had the whole poem in front of me, but I think it kind of walked away when my 10-month-old was fighting me today. So I only have about 2 lines from it. But I selected this, and what I'm looking at is A Book Without a Name. And I'm looking at the short poem, The Dead Are There. And this is going to be page 2. He awoke from a night of burning passion to that harlot's empty mortal shell. You are certainly showing, and you are not telling, my friend. And I read that entire poem probably twice. That's what I did, just really kind of... With me, I have to kind of be careful with some of this SplatterPunk, because just some of the scenes I've seen in, my life in general, I don't like the word triggered. I think that's a bad description for what's going on inside of someone. But for some reason, this poem made me feel really safe in reading it. And I think it was how you handle the subject matter. But I've always heard it say that a good gore fest should hit you like a car crash. Unexpected and traumatic. And this work of yours, as I was trying to illustrate, is kind of like that for me. And it's been living rent-free in my brain for the past couple of days. I know, and for our audience, me and Ben have been talking for about a week about doing this. I probably ran across this poem about 4 days ago, so it's been kind of in the back of my head. With that being said, have you ever experienced as a writer, as an author, as a creator, has a character, a scene just absolutely stuck with you? long after you've written it? Like, have you woken up at night and you're like, man, like you just kind of feel a visceral reality from something that you've written?
I think that it was like Michelangelo that had said that he didn't create art, but that he just like unveiled what was underneath the block of marble that he was doing. I visualize what's going to happen. I have it lined out in my head. Honestly, the way that I do it, I know there's different authors that do it different ways, but I'll have an Excel document because you see that I have people in specific places and all that. And so I'll have this timeline like going down there, and here's what's got to happen in these chapters because it's just so comprehensive. When I wrote the Confederado, totally not that way. It's a novella. It's just I had a general idea of what villains or almost boss battles he was going to do. That's very splatter western. I based a lot of that off of Resident Evil: The Village and Diablo, but it's in Oaxaca, Mexico, and it is just really brutal. Stylistically, a lot of that came from Cormac McCarthy's Blood Meridian, or An Evening of Redness in the West. I liked how he was overly descriptive of things in a good way. So, I'll talk about like the desert ground in way too much detail, but in a way that kind of has a poetry in it. But yeah, with God Walks the Dark Hills, I really have to plan things out because it's like they have to go places that make sense. And when things happen, they need to have some kind of an impact because that's the way that life is. It changes us. It causes us to come to a fork in the road, and you've got to go this way or you've got to go that way.
One thing that I love about the work of Cormac McCarthy is this tension between not free will and determinism. I don't think he's that simple of a philosopher, but the idea is that the choices that we have in life, are they true choices? And please feel free to step in and correct me. I don't want to step out of line, but in his work, Blood Meridian, the main character, the kid, he is constantly placed in these situations where he has to make a moral choice. But it seems like other characters, like the judge, and if there ever was a more perfect description of like a satanic figure, I think the judge in Cormac McCarthy's Blood Meridian is definitely going to drive it. I mean, he was like a machine of just brutal rationality. His character was inhuman, and he was a dark spiritual being as well. I mean, he had no hair on him. Like the judge had no hair, and I think of like the Egyptians, the idea of the, sun god, you like as you rise into heaven, you lose your hair. And in Cormac McCarthy's work, it's like the moral decisions we have aren't really real decisions because there's always something compelling us to make a bad decision. And what I would like to lead into is when I got off of your bio, and this really stuck out to me, is God is judge, the devil is real, people are cruel. And I wanted to ask you, is this a literary device you put to use, or is this an observation about the nature of humanity itself? And I think depending on how you answer, it's going to help me understand the work of Cormac McCarthy a little bit better.
I think that that's the three pillars of Western horror. I think that that's the whole tone of Western horror. When you look theologically at Christianity, and yes, the Bible absolutely does say that God is love, but that wasn't hammered in the 19th century. What was hammered is hellfire and brimstone. It was hardcore. You have elements of the demonic there that are in the book. When you look at people in my God Walks the Dark Hill series, and honestly more stuff, I'm just going to tell you something as a little bit of a spoiler, and everybody, Peter Grimm appears a lot of times. Peter Grimm keeps popping up and stuff. If there was one constant character, chthonic idiot god, it doesn't matter if people don't know what that is right now. He's not a person. He pops up in it, and it's just like, it's not this main thing that's going on, because you kind of have the wickedness of men and human villains and people choosing to be bad or good or blur the lines, but it pulls out that there are things worse than you can possibly comprehend that hide in the shadows, that there's intelligent evil, and that there's all kinds of stuff like that. So he gives like an ugly tone like that. I will say that I was largely inspired by a particular character when I developed him, Final Fantasy VII Sephiroth, because he's really nihilistic. I thought, what would it be like if because you or me, if you were in a fight with somebody, you would get tired, you would sweat. What if there was somebody that was beyond that they didn't get tired, that they didn't sweat, that they looked ageless, that nothing that you seem to be doing is affecting them, and just, he doesn't care if you live or die. In fact, he wants to drag it out because it's fun. It's like a cat playing with a little bird or mouse. That's Peter Grimm, and honestly, that's every one of the chthonic idiot gods. There's only one other one that has a primary thing in it. Through the series, it will go through more details about who and what they are. I don't like to use like the whole vampire thing or whatever, because people have just messed it up so bad. I have some Wendigo stuff in there. I think that people are messing that up. When you look at the Encyclopedia of Canada about Wendigos, you find about people that were literally demon possessed that said, I'm going to murder and eat this whole village unless you A, exorcise this demon out of me that's trying to take me, or B, cap me in the head. And so they would kill people. The English stepped in about that, and they're like, well, we've got laws where you can't do that. And they're like, look, this is the way it's already been done. The people weren't aware of that. But no, I do all kinds of research. You quoted Blood Runs Cold. That's about the Wendigo. Their ice turns to blood, their blood turns to ice and all that. Talk way scarier than the antler thing. That you get somebody with these thin, cracked lips, and they're kind of looking like Gollum or like the things out of The Descent or whatever, and it's just some person that's kind of got the frostbitten fingers and toes, and they've stripped down like half naked or something, like a demoniac out of the New Testament, and they just want to tear you apart. You might have caught too. I have a move like tigers because I think that that's scary, and it's not natural for a person to move that way. It tells you, it makes you want to run the other way.
You bring up a really good point about some of the genre monsters like vampires, Wendigo, is that a lot of the work out there that I'm seeing, and I don't know where you are on the philosophical spectrum, but it's like me, my heart is a pre-modernist, but I see our culture, as a postmodern society that tries to reduce everything down to the material. And they've done that to our monsters. Like the vampires are just, hey, they happen to be different. They happen to have a virus. And it seems like the modern mind hates the transcendent. They hate the idea that there's a transcendent, non-material reality beyond them. And I see that perfectly expressed in these new vampire movies.
You're right.
They're not afraid of crosses. There's no mysticism behind them. There's no perennial truth that the vampire has set themselves against, and so they're trapped in some weird cycle between life and death. And I think authors like you, authors like Gary Brandener, when he was alive, the late great Gary Brandener, author of the Howling series about werewolves, I felt like those guys and you are trying to recapture some of that. So as a reader, I can tell you I really, really appreciate that.
I love Frankenstein. I love all the old stuff.
Have you ever read any Ambrose Pierce by chance?
A lot, and I absolutely adore it.
Okay.
That's
my litmus test too.
No, I hear you. With the vampire thing, I look at Anne Rice, and Anne Rice said that when she's writing an Interview with the Vampire and all this other stuff, because she's somebody that was raised up in church and she walked away and she came back to it.
And then she walked away.
Yeah, I know. She said, if I realized I was writing about myself, I wouldn't have wrote that.
Mm.
And she said that, that the vampire, it's the picture of sin. That's great metaphorically, because they're cast out into darkness. Because it's this evil thing. So they've got this embitterment towards God and towards man. Because, it's not like, hey, I'm happy, I'm going to live forever. Because they're this creature of the night and everything, that they're this vile thing, but now they sparkle, now there's something that's totally different. but that gives it such a good narrative. You know, when you read like Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, which by the way I think that Penny Dreadful captured amazingly with their character
Me and my
John
wife
Locke.
we saw that movie about 2.5 years ago, loved it. It captured the essence for you. We saw it, yeah. It was really, really good movie. I think it was on Netflix, I think. Was it Netflix
maybe.
or something? I can't remember
It
now.
was HBO that did the series.
Yeah, okay.
Yes, but it, you know, in the book Frankenstein, there's this awesome, you know, stuff. You know, the characters relating to like Adam appealing to God, and it's like, and you made me, and why can't I appeal to you? And this guy's just disgusted by this thing that he created. So you've got like this deep thinking, philosophical, almost like theological, like well thought out stuff, and you know, all this bitterness and all this ugliness, and well, what about this and what about that? And it gives it more depth. It gives it more dimension. It's not just some hollowed out, you know, empty writing husk. I think it matters if the character was raised in a Baptist church or whatever, because it lets you know where they're coming from in life. How do you justify what you're doing? Because you get the whole everybody's the hero of their own story. What is their mindset, right or wrong? How are they looking at this, and how are they justifying the things that they're doing?
That's really amazing. And, you know, a person's background, well, especially their religious background, is being forgotten in a lot of writing today. I mean, and it's virtually non-existent in the movies. But, you know, what religion gives a lot of people, or the lack of a religion, I mean, you could be a Stoic, you could be a Marxist, you could be anything. But what it gives you is the software to process the moral world around you. And what I really enjoyed about Mary Shelley's Frankenstein is it seemed to be an indictment against Western Christianity's, especially the Catholic Church, notion of like original sin. Like, wait a minute, you made me like this? You made me with this curse called original sin? Why did you do that, Dad? And that was always a sense that I got from Mary Shelley, especially her religious upbringing. And, you know, I think with a lot of authors today that I've seen is that they know almost nothing about religion. They know almost nothing about history or philosophy, which is okay. I mean, you don't have to be a nerd like you or me, okay? But they never ask those questions. They never ask those questions. It's like they've adopted the postmodern mindset that all there is material. There's nothing beyond that. You know, they don't think about the ontological dimension of their own reality. And the authors that pull it off, the few of them that are still around, I mean, you know, see, I'm trying to think of, well, let me back up. I'm not trying to bash any authors that I'm friends with, especially on Twitter, guys. But my favorite authors, most of them are dead, like Frank Herbert, who was an avowed modernist. He didn't believe in the transcendent, but his books and his characters certainly did, and that reality kind of came through it. But this seems like a good lead into our next question. Do you believe in the paranormal? Do you have a metaphysical sense of the world? Sorry about that. Did you answer?
No, yes.
Okay.
Absolutely.
All right. So what does the paranormal mean to you? Does that mean that there's another reality that we can't see? Does that mean that, you know, what do you think it means?
That question, I mean, I could go way beyond what time that we have for the show. I'm really theological. I don't just mean like, hey, I've picked up the King James Bible and I've read it. Yeah, there's a difference between reading and there's a difference between studying. We're talking about Septuagint Greek. We're talking about Hebrew.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I could talk about Psalm 82, that you were gods, but now you're going to die as men. And, you know, about Babel and all that, and spiritual placeholders that God had, you know, because he was going to call all the nations back to him, redeem them through Jesus Christ and all that. That's the Christology of that. You know, where God says, I'm going to punish the gods of Egypt there in the Exodus. You know, it doesn't say, hey, I'm going to punish the tooth fairy, because it's not a thing. Mm-hmm. But certainly that there were these beings in the book of Daniel, that the prince of Persia withstood Michael, the archangel. You know, the Apostle Paul talked about principalities and powers and rulers of darkness in high places, so that a demon isn't just like a dog or a cat, like a mammal. It's not just one thing. I mean, there's this whole hierarchy between the angelic, between the demonic. I know that scientifically that sound never dies, that this conversation that I'm having with you, like here in this room, that yet will become so faint that you can't hear it, but that it's there. I wonder if in certain places, if people are hearing, I guess, echoes from the past. I know that places, not just biblically, but in other things that are blessed or that are cursed. If you went to Auschwitz, you could feel something there. If you went to where Jesus walked, you could feel something there. Whether it be this blessed holy thing or whether it be this benevolent thing. I do think that places get marked with things that happen. There's certainly enough of them on the map that people have, kind of picked out that, man, you just feel good all over, or creepy stuff happens in those places because of something that went down there. So yeah, I think that there's a huge spiritual dimension of things. And I'm one of these people that, as much as I do know, me, you, whoever, I'm not omniscient. I don't care to say I don't know, because I think that you lose credibility when you want to act like, yeah, I'm going to give you some goofy answer to this. I don't know everything. But that's what I believe. I believe in all of that. There's a lot more than we can see and that we can hear. And you get that with germs even. It's like, you're crazy, man. There's all this stuff flying around the air. So many things. And then it hits you in the head. We don't even know how many things are living in the oceans. Every time that they start going deep, they find something new. So let alone the spiritual.
Are you familiar with the work of Dr. Michael Heisman or Heisman? I apologize, sir,
if
you're going across. I think so. Heiser, he wrote what was it? He wrote an entire thing on the book of Enoch.
Yes, it's like Dr. Michael. I love him. He's a super nice guy, by the way. If you reach out to him, he's great. I mean, he's written me back with stuff. I love him. I have several of his books. I've got the Reversing Herman.
That's exactly what I'm thinking. Yeah. Okay.
The Demons and Angels. I've read the book of Enoch. Yeah. I've read so much extra biblical literature. I have read full on pagan literature. I've read grimoires, all kinds of stuff. Since I was young, and my upbringing is it's church, it's Christian, but I think that you can't have conversations with people and not understand where they're coming from. When I was a teenager, I really kind of got into. I liked Bob Larson because he would have his talkback show. He'd be talking to Anton LaVey's daughter and whatever. So I was like, man, that's just really happening. But no, I mean, if you're what does the Baptist believe? What does the Pentecostal believe? What does the Methodist believe? What does the left-handed path believe? What does this thing believe over here? What does the Buddhist believe? I know. Generally speaking, not that every individual walks some firm doctrine line, pre-trib, post-trib, mid-trib. I made a lady really mad at me that was talking to me about theology. I said I'm pan-trib. And she's looking at me all wild. She's like, what is that? I said, however it pans out, I don't care as long as I'm going.
100%.
Yeah.
For myself, I started out as a Lutheran, and then I converted to Catholicism, which that's currently, the poison that I've chosen. And, but I'm kind of at a point where I used to really kind of snub my nose at concepts like universalism. I don't know if you're familiar with the work of Dr. David Bentley Hart, that all shall be saved. And so I've kind of had my worldview shattered 2 times. And I believe that Dr. Jeff Kripal said that he doesn't trust anyone unless they've had their worldview shattered at least a couple of times. So I'm definitely in the camp where I believe in an ontological reality that is non-material ultimately. I think ultimately when we die, there'll be a non-material aspect to what survives. But I've really kind of learned humility, like you said, if you just don't know, because I've learned I can use these terms like demon, angel, spirit, flesh, but really though, what do they actually mean? How can I really get into, what the nature of being is? And So it's a question now where I'm just like, hey, you know what? I'm going to find some good authors like Ben Blankenship. I'm going to read his stuff,
Well,
and I'm just not going to worry about reality.
Yeah,
What's that?
yeah. B.L. Blankenship. That's all
B.L.
the Western
Blankenship.
Yes, yes.
All right,
So,
folks. B.L. Blankenship.
it stands for Benjamin Lee, but yeah, it's B.L. Blankenship. Again, they're fiction. I don't write my Western horror stuff trying to change somebody's mind or whatever. I have had people come up to me, not a lot. There was a lady who came up to me, and I'm presuming that she's been church hurt or whatever, which I totally get that, and so have I. But she's like, "What does this have to do with God? What is God in the? Is this a Christian book?" And I really try to be tender with people. I told her, I said, "Look," I said, "there is no redemptive Christian value in this book whatsoever." I'm honest with people. If it was an evangelistic book, I would tell them that it was an evangelistic book. If this was like a chick track drug out into a bloody horror novel, I would tell them that it was. It's not. It's a story. I'll have people come up to me that do understand that God Walks the Dark Hills is the name of a gospel song, Southern Gospel, Happy Goodman's fantastic song, by the way. There's other people that do it, and I thought that would be such an awesome name for like a Western horror story, you know. And then the second one, you know, which isn't written on the cover, but Here Among the Shadows and the Lonely Land. That's a line from a gospel song. It's called Looking for a City. The third book, they're not all named after songs. The third book, Ain't No Grave. Again, that's consistently Happy Goodman's, Happy Goodman's, Happy Goodman's. I like the group. The fourth one is The Brightness of His Coming. That's the book of Revelation. The fifth one will be The Hills of... I'm writing the fourth one right now. It'll be done this year, so 2022 by the winter. The Hills of Home will be book 5. The Wrath of the Lamb will be book 6, but they're all God Walks the Dark Hills. So, you know, I mean, I'll take things like that. You know, it's like I'm going to name a story, Old Time Religion, but it has nothing to do with the gospel song. I'm just like, that would just be like an awesome name for that. The Dead Are There, that poem, that's out of the book of Proverbs.
Well, for the record, I think you are a really great guy, and I think you're very humble. But if we look at the broad trend of history, I think that fiction, my friend, is going to outlast nonfiction. I've always said, like, if a meteorite struck planet Earth and it took us back into the Stone Age, people aren't going to remember, you know, the fragments of Heraclitus, you know, Plato's Republic, if they have access to them, right? They're going to remember the great book that I got off the shelf. They're going to remember their Goosebumps. They're going to remember their Frank Herberts. And so, with that being said, do you think that fiction describes reality or tells the truth better than nonfiction? Or is that even a fair question?
I think that fiction can make you think, and it can tell you moral things or whatever. The Little Red Hen. You know, I think a lot of people know The Little Red Hen. My favorite story as a little boy was Brer Rabbit. You know, where he's like, "Don't throw me in the briar patch." By the way, that's a lot filthier, the original French version. If you go to these Creole plantations, yeah.
Well, of course it is. It's French, but...
Yeah. Well, don't, you know, pardon my French. don't throw me in the briar patch. Don't throw me in the briar patch. He's from the briar patch. So he manipulates them. I think that things like that make an impression with people. You know, they instill something in them. They see some kind of value or some kind of lesson in them. If it's written a certain way, they'll empathize with this character. They'll think, man, this is a bad guy. You know, when you're writing a villain, essentially, you probably want people to hate them. You know, I don't know. Reginald Beauregard Valencia, and I'm not going to say what's going to happen with him, but he has a lot of bad stuff happen to him, and he goes to some dark places, and I don't want to give anything away for for how that will go. But there's some definite people in there, in that book, Clay Corpse and whatnot, that they're just full on villain. You're not really seeing a lot of redemptive quality in them. You're not really seeing something that's drawing you. You're like, what an entitled jerk.
You see, that's something that I can actually get behind, because it seems like the zeitgeist of our culture these days is, well, everything is gray. There is no, white and black, no good or bad, everyone. But I mean, we've witnessed some characters in history who just had no redeemable qualities. I mean, it's almost like you were talking about the story of the Wendigo, these people that just lose their humanity. And our history, we have faced down those monsters. We have faced them down. So, I mean, that's the type of writing I can definitely get behind.
Well, thank you.
Yes.
I don't know that it's not even redemptive, or, good qualities. I think that they're negated. Adolf Hitler, some of his paintings were decent. They were pretty nice, but who cares? Because look at what kind of person he was. So what does it matter that he could paint, a painting that's like, man, that's pretty good, because it's overridden by how awful he is. I think a lot of times the people in history, and you'll hear people say different things about the church or whatever. The problem is when you've got people that try to play God, whether it's like Hitler or Stalin, who were flagrantly anti-God, or whether you have, awful things that happen in church history. And I've studied the history of Christianity. It's really disparaging things that people would do in the name of the Lord, but they're playing God and they're doing awful things.
The history of Christianity is this constant struggle between burying your reason, your intellect, and what you know to be logical against what somebody else is telling you is revealed truth. And it seems like, well, especially me, when I was really, really, really deep into religion, there was a threshold I had to cross morally where 2 + 2 would equal 5. You just had to accept it. And if you look at the, I guess, philosophical and theological conclusions that people who are really religious, especially in the Christian West, I know that in the East, the Orthodox churches, they definitely have their issues and they did a whole bunch of bad things. But you never really saw it as systematized as you did in the Catholic West. I mean, it was just like, they took God and turned him into a horror show, is what they did. And so, yeah, so that's definitely a very insightful comment about our history. But kind of moving us along. So your stories are an incredible range of rash action to judgment, suffering, and a kind of physical torture that transcends the characters into a greater understanding or doubt of their own existence. And this kind of goes back to what I said before about showing versus telling. With that being said, why do bad things happen to good people, in your opinion, both in your work and in the real world?
I'm going to be really Bible, and I'm going to quote Jesus, that it rains on the just and the unjust, and also go to the metaphor that he gives. I feel like it applies to a wide range of things. He talked about the difference between the person whose house is built on the solid rock and the person whose house is built on the sand. I think there's a lot of that in all of our lives. Marriage. If the storms of life rail against my wife and my marriage, how solid is it? Because it's either going to be stronger from that, or it's going to fall apart, because it is that steady and rock solid. And I know he was coming at it with more of a theological thing, but I think that that's true in a lot of stuff. What would you do in the situation, or that situation says a lot about your character. And in fiction, it's story development. I like the movie The Good Son, where Macaulay Culkin is just evil, and Elijah Wood is he's this nice kid, but he's like the nephew, and this mom's holding on to Macaulay Culkin, the monster, and her like nephew, who's the good kid, and they're both saying, "Please don't let go of me. Please don't let go of me. Please don't." What are you going to do? What's going to happen? Because I mean, Macaulay Culkin would have let go of them both if he was up there. The choices that we make, it says things about us. There's some things that are written brilliant. I really like Breaking Bad, the series. I don't know if you've ever seen it. In
I hate to say it,
Japanese
I've
anime,
never seen that. Yeah, it's definitely on my to
it's
watch list.
phenomenal.
Yeah, it's definitely on there.
It's phenomenal. It's following this guy that's justifying himself, but then he keeps doing worse and worse and worse things. That there's like, it's like, is there any justification for this? In Japanese anime, I feel like the best written thing that's ever been made. It's a series called Death Note. Um, this guy gets a book, and if he pictures somebody's face, and if he writes their name in it, they'll die, mostly of a heart attack, unless he like specifies, but they'll die. So he thinks, I'm going to get rid of all the bad people. So he looks at these criminal people, serial murderers, whatever, in prison, and he starts sniping them out, sniping them out, sniping them out. And this legal organization, they're like, we've got a serial murderer here. I don't know how this is happening, but something's going on. And there's this it's cat and mouse. But when the cops are going to close in on them, he'll take out anybody that gets in his way. So it really tells you something about this person's character, that they've got a God complex, that not only am I taking out people that are genuinely bad, or, that I feel, but I'm going to take out anybody that gets in my way. And this thing that's called a God of Death, what is it? I can't think of the word. It's a Japanese word, but this thing that's a God of Death, it says, after you do kill them all, the only monster left will be you. So I mean, it's really good writing.
Oh yeah, a lot of Japanese anime have wonderful stories out there, wonderful writing, like you said. Is there anything else that you would like to say, Ben? I think this is about wrapping up our hour. I feel like
This
we
has been
could talk
fantastic.
for 2 more hours, to be quite
Oh,
honest. There's
easy,
a lot
easy.
of stuff I would love to circle back around and ask you about. I'm just dying to, but I hear my
Um,
10-month-old in the background.
I hear you. Uh, Real quickly, I've got a link tree. After the link tree thing / Western horror.
Which, for our
Uh,
viewers and listeners, if you click the description to the show, there will be a link to his link tree where you can purchase his books. And also in the pinned comments below, I'm going to pin a comment, and I'm going to see if I can put a link in that as well. So one final question, though. What book should our viewers get started with your work on? Where is going to be point A for them?
that is so subjective. God Walks the Dark Hills series, if you get into that, it's going to turn into 6 novels. Will be the completion of that. I plan to have all of those done by the end of 2023, by the way.
Okay,
I have
awesome.
a novella, The Confederado. I have a collection of short stories, Look Away Dixieland. I've got a anthology that has 7 stories by me, a book without a name. Any one of those kind of take you into that place. It's just, do you prefer a short story, or do you want to get into a series of novels? I just think it's a matter of taste.
Uh, yeah, oh yeah, for sure. And I was going to say, for my first purchase, I'm definitely going to go for God Walks the Dark Hills, books 1 and 2. I'm definitely going to do that, and I'm going to get the full poem, "The Dead Are There." I'm going to be now. That's on your that's on the link tree as well, right? That's a collection of poems, right? Or
The Dead Are
stories and a
There.
poem.
It is a singular poem that is found inside of a book without a name. I initially put it out. There's this other author that's like, you just put out these short things and you can just sell them as an ebook. I tried that. A book without a name is how you would get it physically. It's got a number of things by me in it. Some great authors, some public domain authors as well. E.T.A. Hoffman's The Sandman is in it.
Oh,
H.P. Lovecraft's
okay.
The Music of Eric Zahn is in it. The rest of the people, like Shakespeare, Edgar Allan Poe, and so forth, they're like a poem, like in between. It gives it that Victorian kind of tone and everything. It's also amazing to say that I'm in a book with them.
So, um, there's someone out there, and they're probably, they're watching this interview with you. They may have run across your work. They may have followed us on Twitter, which there will be a link to our Twitter handles as well. And suppose there's someone, they have a story idea. They have dreams about being an author. Where should they start? What should they do?
There's a lot to that. I have people come to me about publishing stuff all the time. I've published through about 5 different self-publishing things. I'm an Ingram Spark guy. Ingram Spark is my favorite place to self-publish. But when I work on these books, I have some friends that are authors. They do some proofreading and stuff. In turn, I plug them. Grammarly is amazing, just as like another quick sweeping way to get some punctuation things right. I love Grammarly. It's so helpful. There's a lot of things that you can do, but just reach out. The reason that I know about Ingram Spark is because an author told me about Ingram Spark. All of these things, it's a good community that wants to help each other and everything. Whereas I put on the whole like Western horror thing. I mean, it says it on my table, and there's a lot of people that have written Western horror books, but they don't come out and say I'm a Western horror author. I feel like anybody reads that makes them fall in love with that particular subgenre, it's good for the whole thing. It's good for me. It's good for Joe Lansdale, who I'm just throwing him out. He's the king of Western horror. If you ask anybody that,
what's his name?
Joe Lansdale, Lansdale. He's written a lot of Jonah Hex comics as well as a lot of novels and books. Had involvement in so many things. A few movies. He Bubba Hotep and all kinds of stuff.
Bubba Hotep.
But,
that's a good one.
But his son is actually going to be in an anthology that I'm spearheading, Keith.
Oh.
And Keith has an amazing background too. Keith can bring it. Keith's not just Joe Lansdale's son, just like Joe Hill's not just Stephen King's son. He can bring it. So I'm really looking forward to that. I've got a lot of great people on there. C. Derek Miller, Christine Morgan, Megan Stockton, a whole lot of people that are coming on board to that have a footprint therein, and it's nice. It really is. But yeah, people will work with you. Absolutely. My advice too, when you get books out, would be to hit like local conventions and all that. Your overhead will be a lot less, and you'll fare better.
Well, it sounds like you are very successful in this endeavor, and I wish you nothing but the very best. And more importantly, I hope to have you back on the show.
I hope to be back on. Thank you so much. This has been awesome.
Well, I can tell you this. My late mother was an aspiring writer, but she suffered from a terrible mental illness when I was growing up that she eventually succumbed to. And, her dream was to be a writer. And so, and it seems like a lot of people who have influenced me in my life and have kind of kept me on the right track have either been authors themselves, or they had that work, in the top sock drawer. They had a novel that was just sitting there. And I hope with the show Reader's Labyrinth, they kind of just help you guys out. Hey, if I can help give you exposure, because I think there's so many authors out there who are incredible human beings. They think very, very deeply about the world around them. They notice things normal, they notice things the majority of people don't. And so I'm hoping to bring some light to that so people can see you, get familiar with your work, and hopefully move some copies out. Hopefully, as this channel grows, move some copies out for you.
That's amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for being here. I appreciate it.
Thanks.